Okay. Okay, so the verse in the Megillah says, this is the Pachad Yitzchak, this is on Purim, and this is Inyan Lamed Daled 34, and because we're not learning about Pesach today, I've chosen this piece to do as an intro for Pesach.
By the way, I do have a Shavuot one.
Well, that hopefully we will get there. We will get there in the year. That's good. In the meantime, there's Pesach, and it's very, very hard to do Shavuot without Pesach because Shavuot is just the 8th day of the 7 days of Pesach. Okay, so the verse in the Megillah says, "V'zichram lo yosif mizaram," and their memory will never be ended from their seed, meaning the Purim story and the celebration of Purim and the need to read the Megillah and remember this nes will never dissipate from the Jewish people ever, for generations, forever. Okay? So Chazal say, "Afilu bizman shekol hamoadim yitbatlu Purim lo yitbatel." So Chazal say an interesting statement. Everybody quotes this. Everybody has a different pshat on it. So Chazal say, you know what this verse means? That means even when we come to a time where all the other festivals will become nil and nullified, Purim will never become nullified.
Right.
How will you ever have an era in history where the awesome impact of a Pesach and a Shavuot and a Sukkot will be nullified and irrelevant in history, and Purim will be? What a strange statement.
Yeah.
Some people imagine that we're not going to eat matzah when Mashiach comes, but we're going to wear masks on Purim. It can't be what it's talking about. Okay. So Chazal say this is based on the verse V'zichram lo yosif mizarim, and their memory will never be reaped, gathered in, ended from their seed. Okay, so the approach to understanding this is as follows. Mashal, there's a parable. L'shnei bnei adam, there's two guys. Shenitztavu lahakir anashim balayla, and they were told, they were stationed at an important place, and they were told that they have to recognize particular individuals that may pass by at night. They're in a dark place at night, and they have to be able to identify and recognize certain individuals. Ha'echad, one of these guys, hidlik neri, he's got a light. He lights a candle. V'hibit b'fnei ha'anashim, and he looks at these guys, la'or haner, to the light of his candle, b'chtei la'akir et p'neihem, in order to identify them. Lahasheni, to the second guy, lo hayaner, he didn't have a candle. U'mikiven shahaya muchrach la'akir et anashim, but he still had to identify these people. Imen et atzmo la'akiram b'tfiyut eina dekala. He taught himself, he looked for ways of identifying in a very, very quick way. Meaning he looked for things that stand out that he could identify, things that would not require some sort of intense search. V'nimtza le'inyan habrirut v'habihirut harishon adaf me'asheni. She'ari hakarat adam b'chush hariya hayayoter brura me'asher hakarat adam b'chush hashmiya. Okay. So, I'm sorry. So one guy one had a light, and he was able to search his face. The other one didn't have a light, so bitfiut eina, he was able to identify him dekala with the sounds that he makes from his voice. Okay, right. So he can't tell. He doesn't know what the guy looks like, but he doesn't need to see what the guy looks like. He looked for something, right? For the okay. He was able to identify in a sound. Le'inyan haberirut, in terms of clarity, behirut, the lightness, the radiance, the illumination, harishon adaf milasheni. The guy who's got a light, he's better, stronger than the second guy. She'ari hakarat adam b'chush hariya, the recognition of somebody with the sense of vision. Hu yoter brura, it is clear, ma'asher hakarat adam b'chush hashmiya. To when you seeing there's no comparison to hearing, right? Avalu matzot, but what does the second guy have on the first guy? Yesh la'asheni adifut al rishon, shehu sagal li'atzmo kishon chadash shel hakshava lekol bnei adam. He has, because he doesn't have those resources to see, he has developed for himself the ability to identify through hearing.
It's amplified his ability to...
Right, like when we talk about a blind person, how his other senses compensate.
Right.
So he, Daredevil has superhuman hearing because he's blind. Okay, so V'harishon, the first guy, he's using a flashlight. Chaser lo kisharon zeh. He does not have the ability. He never developed the ability to actually identify things, differentiate with his ear. Okay, so chaser lo, it's lacking for him kisharon zeh, the ability shel hakara, for identification al yedei chush hashmiya, through the sense of hearing. V'nimtza, and it turns out the achar kach, after the fact. L'kishayala amud hashachar, when the sun comes up, v'harishon yichbet nero, the first guy doesn't need his flashlight anymore. Dishraga betira mayahani, because as Chazal say, what do you need a flashlight when the sun's up? Kol hakochot shenitna lo avodato balayla lo haner miutarim hem achshav. All the tools that were given to him to navigate that darkness are superfluous now. He doesn't need them. Avalu amatzot. In contrast to this, Hasheni, the second guy, Nehi de Achshav Gamhu Makir Anashim. It's true, he doesn't need to identify these guys anymore because the sun's up. Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Kochot Hashmiya V'Akshava Sheyatzra Bo Avodato B'Choshech. The ability to hear and to listen that he created for himself when he worked hard at night, La'olam Nisharim Kinya Benafsho, are forever acquired by him in his being. So he upgraded himself. So, where are we going with this? Any ideas?
Well,
Okay.
it's just a confirmation that your disadvantage becomes an advantage.
Okay, so, Boaz, if I had to ask you, the great events of the redemption of Egypt that we celebrate on Pesach, or the giving of the Torah on Shavuos, etc., would I compare those manifestations of God in the world to a time of light or darkness?
Light.
Right, God is really clear. All you got to do is open your eyes, you see Him. Now, if I had to talk about, let's say, a story like Purim or Hanukkah, is that light or darkness?
Light.
Why is there light?
Because what looked like it was going to be a disaster turned out to be a miracle.
But the light over here is, you're thinking of the light as God's good. I'm talking about the light of the being able to see God. Meaning, we characterize the era of Purim as a time of the hiding of God's face.
Oh.
Right? Even the miracles that we experience during Purim are miracles that God employed through non-miraculous means. I mean, the great impact, the chidush, the novelty of Purim is that God shows that He's just as active and as present within what looks like regular, natural course of events. The problem is that He doesn't have a big flashing light on His helmet when He's operating that, so you don't see Him in real time, right? So that's darkness, right?
Okay.
So the ability of learning to see God in how He operated in the context of a Purim is the ability to appreciate a hashkacha pratit story in your life. To see how God, to look for God and see Him there, whereas you never probably had this ability if you were a Jew that lived in biblical times, because you never needed to. God was God, and God was there, and when you saw Him, you said, but you couldn't function in a place where reality was a little bit too chaotic for you, because where would God be then? But all of a sudden, after Purim, man, it's clear to us that are tuned in. We know how to look. We've learned from Purim to see God constantly, regardless of whether you're in a state of light or darkness. So we can hear Him, right? I think that's where we're probably going with this. Okay. Vihine. B'shana mu'beret. When you have a leap year, koren et hamegillah ba'adar sheni. You have two adars, and the Gemara wants to know. You're going to have two adars. Which one's the real adar, and which one do you read the Megillah on? And we know from practice that the second adar is the adar that we celebrate Purim. Why don't we celebrate Purim the first adar? So one of the reasons given in the Gemara is because we want to put the redemption that's celebrated in Purim near the redemption celebrated in Pesach, whatever that means. Why? What's the meaning? But that's what Chazal say. Okay. So v'taima, the reason mishum desamchina gulat Purim and the gulat Mitzrayim. We want to juxtapose the miraculous redemption and salvation experienced in Purim to that which was experienced from Mitzrayim on Pesach. Ve'aleinu ladat, and it is upon us to know. You know, associated with the whole story of Mitzrayim, we have the word Anochi. There's an Anochi associated with the Geula of Mitzrayim. What's the Anochi? Anochi, the first of the 10 utterances, when God gave the at Har Sinai, it says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Havaya your God, Asher Hotzeiticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of Mitzrayim. Meaning, who took you out of Mitzrayim? It was Anochi. It was God calling himself me. It was clear to every, right? You couldn't have more of a clarity. God was roaring to the world, hey everybody, this is me, right? That's the, right? It was a manifestation of God was saying, this is how God wants everybody to know him, right? Hi, right? So, just like there's an Anochi, where God says, this is who I am, and he presents himself in an event of Geula of Mitzrayim, you should know that there's Kemokein Yesh Lagam Geulat Purim Anochi Mishala. Purim also has an Anochi. There's a form of God saying through the event of Purim that he's telling everybody, this is me. I'm presenting myself in the world, and I want you to identify me as such. Through this, the personality of the events of Purim. And why? Because Chazal link the whole story of Purim to the verse in Deuteronomy that says, on that day, Anochi will hastir et panai. I will hide my face. So who's hiding his face? Also Anochi, right? So there's a state of Anochi manifest in Mitzrayim, and that's directly contrasted to the Anochi, the state of Anochi in Purim. Right, we know that's linked from the famous Gemara that says, right, I mentioned it last time, how do we know, where's the root for Esther, where's Esther hinted at in the Torah? Because the verse says, on that day I will surely hide my face, and the word hide is hastir astir. Okay? So, Kilomar, that is to say, Shtei drachim yeshla l'knesset Yisrael lakir et anochi. There are two ways, two avenues for the holy congregation of Israel to recognize the Anochi, the face of Hashem, so to speak. Al yidei gulat Mitzrayim, through a redemption from Mitzrayim that is through the most fabulous, miraculous, topsy-turvy in terms of nature events that ever existed. That's with all the bells and whistles. Obviously, there's an Anochi of Matan Torah also. That Anochi whatever, we're not going to get into that now, but right, but Anochi bridges that, meaning this, we're talking about this Anochi, and we see how it manifests in Mitzrayim and how it manifests in Purim, okay? So, there's the Anochi that we get to know through Mitzrayim, and that, he dugmat ha'adam ha'makir et chavero be'ezrat kli ha'or shenitan lo, and that is like our parable of a guy who identifies he's able to make out his friend with a lantern. V'ilu hakara sheknesset Yisrael makira et ha'anochi al yidei hagula dehester astir, and the Anochi of Purim, which is the hidden face, that is the recognition that Am Yisrael has of the Anochi of Purim. That's being able to identify him even in a context of hiddenness, that he dugmat hakara she'adam makir chavero al yidei shelamed et atzmo lakira be'ezrat chush acher. That is comparable to our guy in the story who trained himself to identify his friend through alternative senses. Milvad chushariya.
Made noises.
Okay, so what's let's get into the metaphor a little bit. What's the difference between seeing and hearing? Seeing is when you have a direct line of sight.
Right.
Hearing is you don't have that direct line of sight, so you have to infer his presence. So Purim, we didn't have a direct line of sight, and yet in retrospect, it was clear we were hearing, meaning there were other signs. There's signs of his presence that registered, even though we weren't in the line of sight.
So not necessarily hearing.
Right. So yeah, it just means where we had to develop our. So right, what I was saying was that direct. I always say there's no such thing as the culture of Hashgacha Pratit story before Purim. There's no such thing. You ever go to a group meal and they sit around the table and they say, okay, Shabbat afternoon, and the host goes, you would like to go around the table and everybody say your name and maybe tell us a Hashgacha Pratit story that happened to you this week. No, you've never been to one of those meals? And somebody will say, well, it was amazing because, this and this happened to me, and then I was thinking like this, and sure enough, this and this happened, and it's clearly God. And everybody looks at each other and go, well, I'm happy that this person is experiencing their life like that. Externally, maybe it's lost in translation, but clearly that person had the experience. But what's the point of that all? The point is that we are looking in our lives for clues, because we know it's a foregone conclusion God's in our lives, and we're looking to see Him, and we know there's all kinds of things in our experience down here on earth that obfuscate that get in that line of sight. So we're trying to identify and see and appreciate the direct hand of God despite all that. That was all pioneered. That was the great novelty of Purim. Jews never had to relate like that before because they were living open miracles all the time. You lost your car keys, you went to the local Navi, and the Navi told you where they were, and you said, thank you, Hashem. And in the Midbar, depending on what you thought that day and how you spoke that day, that's how many steps you had to take to pick up your daily bread. So God was so directly involved. It was mamish, the feeling of a back and forth of a relationship. We take for granted to survive as Jews in a Gullus post-Purim. That's why the Jews, mamish, thought they were forsaken by God, and they went to the Suda of Achashverosh. The party of Achashverosh is because they thought God forsook them, because how could God be here? God was gone. What always registered as God's presence was not there anymore. And we had to learn how to see through this state of astir, that God's panai, that God is hiding His face, that God is still there and He's still involved. And He wanted to show us how to do that. And that was creating the ability to be able to see God in a deeper way, regardless of the context that you're in a way that we never had before. That's the parable we're talking about, okay? Okay. Now let's take this line of thinking further. When the sun comes up, when God has restored His divine presence to humanity and the world, and we have a Beis Hamikdash and everything is hunky-dory, and the sun comes out in its full power, meaning God is as manifest as possible without blowing our minds. Right? And the light of the revelation of God will be like 70 times that of the light of the sun. Then it will be clear that any sort of tools for enlightenment, any lanterns or candles or flashlights that they have, will be totally superfluous and unnecessary. Because till that point, all connection to God, even the most overt miracles, was to be able to connect to God despite some sort of state of darkness, right? After the sin of Adam Rishon, right? All that will be restored, so yitbatlu b'derech memela, they'll just become superfluous. Ulechein, and therefore, kol hamoadim, all the appointed times, shehem zeichel yetziat Mitzrayim, that are there to instill within us a living connection to the redemption from Mitzrayim, l'kishayavo hayom, when the day comes, asher boti hagula hatida, when the ultimate redemption will be ikar, will be the main reality, ugulat Mitzrayim tafel, and then, only then, will the redemption from Egypt become secondary. Meaning we're living in tension of two times, right? There's going to be a switch, right? Every night of the Seder, every year when we get together on the night of the Seder, we are tapping into the Geula that was as the ultimate assurance of the Geula that will be. Mm-hmm. By drawing on, right, the Geula that was, we're drawing forth to be able to make it to the final Geula. This is all embodied in that moment in the beginning of the Seder where you take the middle matzah and you break it in half, and you take the bigger piece and you hide it. That we're in between the two pieces. The small piece, that's in the bag. But what's the point of that without getting to the bigger piece, right? And that's why the bigger piece is hidden. That's why we play all kinds of games with the kids, right? That's the Mashiach, and that's why it's the last thing we want to eat. You want to do it before 12 o'clock. It's the significance of the ultimate Geula. And that's the whole point of the Seder, right? That's the whole point, meaning we're living in the tension between something that was started and we're trying to draw close to finish. And that's in the Az Yashir, in the Song of the Sea that they sing. All that is a prophecy for the ultimate Geula and the third Beit HaMikdash and everything, because that was the point of it all, okay? It's just been a very, very protracted story with many installments and obstacles along the way. Okay? So, Kol HaMoadim Sheim Zechel Yetziat Mitzrayim, L'Kishayav HaYom Asher Bo Tiyeh HaGeula Atida, Ikar, Ugulat Mitzrayim Tafel, v'harei yesh b'chlal 200 mana. Gam kol hamoadim yitkalu b'or hashemesh al-gula. All the appointed times will be subsumed in the awesome light of that spiritual sun. Ella, the kol zehu b'shar hamoadim. This is only regarding those holidays. The sodam hu ha'or shel gulat Mitzrayim, that the foundation of these holidays are really on the awesome event of Mitzrayim. I'll give you an example. What do we celebrate on Sukkot? What's the significance? What is the historical event that we're celebrating on Sukkot? That's crucial to our whole year. We know Shavuot, we know Pesach. What's Sukkot all about?
Living in tents.
It was that God cared for us in a very, very special way in that miraculous time that we were in the desert. That God didn't just, right, meaning there was a special type of love and a special quality of relationship forever that we look to that period to define what our relationship is. And that means that we see our whole year really, we're in the sukkah, personal sukkah with God, that we're in the membrane, that really we look like we're exposed to the elements, but God is really with us and He's surrounding us. That's right. So that's an aspect that's predicated on the event of Mitzrayim. Matan Torah also. All these things are built on that fundamental step of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and all those holidays that celebrate that, ultimately in this context, they become superfluous. However, Aval Geula de Purim asher al yada Knesset Yisrael limda et atzma lahakir et ha'anochi gam b'choshech v'hester. However, in regards to the miraculous events of Purim, which by necessity, through them, the congregation of Israel taught itself to recognize the Anochi also in darkness and hiddenness. Bevadai, certainly, shezeh yisha'er kinyan olam. This is an acquisition, an eternal acquisition that for sure must stand them in good stead because it increased the quality of their ability to relate to God. B'nafsha shel Knesset Yisrael, within the nefesh itself of the congregation of Israel, afilu la'achar sheyala amud hashachar, even after sun rises and that awesome spiritual sun will burn like 7 times. I mean, whatever that stuff, meaning that awesome period of the Gula Atida, Purim is still relevant. Kol hamoadim betelem, all the appointed times will become nullified, chutz mipurim, except for Purim, for the verse says, like we started off, v'zichram, and their memory, lo yosif, will never be reaped or gathered in, mizarim, from their seed. Okay, one last tiny little paragraph, bring it all together. Huh? Yeah, but I don't have 10 pages. Oh. I just have one little. Yeah. Okay. V'nimtza, and it turns out, yesh shnei minei ha'arot. There's 2 types of godly illumination. Ha'achat, the first, shall Hashem orli. The verse says, God is light to me. God is my light. B'klaliyot, that's in general. God is my light. V'ashniya, and the second is there's a verse that says, Ki eshev b'choshech, though I dwell in darkness, Hashem orli, God is my light. So he's saying there's one verse, and there's 2 parts. Hold on one second. Okay, so this is a verse in Micha 7:8, chapter 7, verse 8, and it says, though I dwell in darkness, God is light to me. So the Pachad Yitzchak is telling us you could just focus on the back half of the pasuk, that you could be in a state that God is my light, or you could zoom out and see the whole verse that God is my light though I dwell in darkness. V'adifuto shel Purim, the choice quality of Purim that it has over all the other appointed times, hidafka al yedei ha'ara hamid notzetzet gam b'choshech. It is because it has a light that shines even in darkness. Ukishem she'akoach hamor la'adam darko gam b'toch ha'choshech yesh ba'adifut legabe or stam. And just like the ability for somebody to know his way even in darkness, is also good for him when it's light outside. Kemo ken otam penine hadat, those pearls of knowledge, hamitnotzitzim, that sparkle bitoch ha'idat shela ad lo yada, of the lack of dat when you're in a state of ad lo yada. Right, on Purim, you're told to drink until you don't know. So he's borrowing from that, and he's describing that the era of Purim, when God was hidden, we didn't know, ad lo yada. And even in that state, we developed ourselves in a way that now we have new sparkles of knowledge of God in our being. So those yikarim he bioter are extra precious. Okay,
Is that the whole thing?
that's the whole thing. The idea was, we covered the idea. Would you like to insert more ideas into that idea?
Normally it's much longer.
I don't know. There's a lot of short ones here. There's a lot. There's a lot of long ones. There's a lot of short ones. There's so much in the sources to work with. But how much time do we have?
You've got another 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. Can we take 2 minutes? Okay.
You want me to restart the thing?
I'll turn this off in case whatever comes of